Good afternoon, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah.
Yes.
thank you.
Uh, yes.
Christina, waiting for a lot of people to join, or I guess it's exactly 5 o'clock. I should give it another minute or so.
I think we give it a minute. I believe more board members will be joining, but as far as staff, I think at least by the time we get to those policies, they should be on.
All right, it is 5:02, so we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruth Fortune. I am the chair of the committee policy within the Hartford Board of Education. We have a relatively short agenda for today, so we'll get started right away. The first item on our agenda is the harassment policy. Thank you, Christina, for pulling it up as we discuss it. Wonderful. So we have revised, we've made proposed revisions, I should say, to our harassment and or bullying policy with respect to staff conduct. And I will pass it over to Deputy Paul Foster to offer any additional comments.
Yes, thank you. So this is the second reading. So we had shared this at the previous policy committee as well as at the full board meeting. And this, what you see, this really came out of the fact that we had CABE review our policies, and we were CABE did a policy audit, and we identified policies we should take a look at. And this was one they thought we should take a look at. And the red line you see here, you can see some examples came from a model policy through CABE. And the biggest change is really around distinguishing between our harassment policy and our anti-discrimination policy, which is a separate document. And so you can see that's really reflected in the changes to the first paragraph. And there are no changes, I should say, we've made no changes to the red line from what was shared at the first reading of this policy. And I'm sorry, one just clarification for the viewing public, just also, this is our staff harassment and bullying policy. So I want to be very clear, we have a separate policy around harassment and bullying relative to students.
Thank you, Deputy Foster. Do we have any questions or comments on this policy and the changes? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to the second item on our agenda, which is the policy regarding our code of ethics. It's a very short change that in essence
Chair.
I'm sorry, I missed your hand. Go ahead.
No, you didn't. I was scrambling trying to find the
okay.
the technology. I apologize. And Deputy Foster, this is probably some education for me. The policy is written as fine. At the very bottom of the policy, there's existing language that all reported incidents will be thoroughly investigated. Is there some detail beyond this policy that instructs the staff as to who to report it to and what's the investigation process? Is there some kind of person who's obligated to kind of, create the report and report it out? And does it go into some kind of database? I know that doesn't go into the actual policy here, but it made me wonder, is that somewhere so that we can execute on that idea of reporting harassment?
Yeah, so we have procedures fully outlined for how we both investigate and then report out on allegations of harassment. I think we have both Aaron Wilson, who's one of our team members in our legal and labor relations department. We also have Attorney Wilson on. So I think Aaron or Ed, do you want to speak to sort of the practice or procedure we follow in terms of operationalizing this policy?
I'll give Ed a chance to jump in if he wants, but so in terms of just like the procedure of what happens when someone files a harassment complaint, you mean?
No, I think, Aaron, that baseline area, like, is there a website location or a link like that says, here's where you go to file a report? And is that somewhere?
Aaron, I could jump in. We have, this is Ed Wilson. So the employee handbook kind of identifies the labor staff, and there's also internal documents that speak to our labor team and how to file a harassment complaint. So we try to get at that in a couple ways. And I believe in the context of the policy, there's also the attachment forms that provide the documentation that a staff member needs to fill out if they're alleging harassment. So there's a couple ways we try to get at it, right? So there's the employee handbook, there's the forms in the policy, and there's also internal documents that are shared out internally with the district as to the members of the labor team for who to be contacted if you want to file a formal complaint of harassment.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that information, Attorney Wilson.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments or questions on this policy? Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda is the Code of Ethics policy, which in short says that the Hartford Public School District will follow the City of Hartford's Code of Ethics, which is what they've been doing. But Cabe pointed out that we did not explicitly state that in our policy. So this change reflects that we are now including in our policy what we've been doing, which is to follow the Hartford Code of Ethics policy. Do we have any questions or anyone wants to add anything to those comments? Okay, perfect. Wonderful. Moving on to the third item on our agenda, which is the naming of facilities or parts of facilities. We did the first reading last week, and I believe Christina did update the attachment so it reflects the most recent changes. The only new substantive addition is the language in red here in 4D, which says, thank you, all right, one more zoom. It adds that even when a school is named after someone, it's with the understanding, Christina, if you could just correct the typo in understanding here, the third word, that naming a school after an individual does not grant that individual, their family, or their their representatives, rather, any ownership, operational control, or influence over the school's policies, procedures, or curriculum. To make it clear that, right, the honor of having a school renamed after you does not give you any rights to directly engage in the affairs of the school. So we will correct that typo in understanding and then recirculate that policy. Would you kindly scroll to 8 below, Christina, only because I know last time it wasn't reflected so everyone can see. That does say the board reserves the discretion to change the name of a school that's been renamed after any individual for any reason that the board so wishes. Any additional comments or questions about this policy? Board Member Mills and
Yeah.
Board Member Walker.
So I don't know if now's the right time to talk about this or later on, but I feel like we might want to have a conversation sooner rather than later about how we go about actually taking suggestions for changing the names and policies of like the names of these buildings. Like this one case seems to be fine in the grand scheme of things, but I worry that by doing this now, we are opening the door for literally anybody to suggest we change the name of a school in favor of somebody. And I think we need to start having a conversation on what are the criteria in which we deem to be an acceptable reason to change the name or honor somebody. I don't necessarily know if this is the right venue for that or proper, like a, board meeting at large. But I am concerned that by changing this policy now without actually thinking of the actual mechanisms behind changing a name, that we might end up having an onslaught of people recommending we change names of schools for people that we might not necessarily want to change the name of a school for. That's not implying that this person is the case. I just think that before we do this, we need to actually have criteria. Yeah.
Thank you. No, that's a fair comment. Christina, could you scroll up for me to the portion that sort of lists out what an applicant is to submit when they're making this request from us? Okay. Thank you. So in number 4, the person proposing that we rename the school, which doesn't have to be the individual, him or herself, would need to provide a clear rationale and purpose for the proposed name, the benefits to the school, right? Evidence of overwhelming support for the proposed name from the community, and any plans for them to further engage with the school, with the addition that they understand that this doesn't give them any right to essentially engage and direct and try to control the affairs of the school. And if it's specifically regarding renaming after an individual, then also biographical material for the achievements of that individual, and why the school should be renamed after them. If you could scroll further, please. Right, and for that specific individual, it has to highlight, why the school should be renamed after them, and also how they've been engaged within the community overall to warrant that change of name. They need to have personal ties to the school or facility that they're seeking to rename after them. So there's arguably quite a bit of criteria spelled out here. Does any of that seem to address some of the concerns that you had, Board Member Mills, or did you have other types of concerns in mind?
Yes, well, so not necessarily concerns. I just think that even internally, maybe not in this policy, but I think we need a structure for getting these requests and judging them, like as a board itself. Like I feel like we might need a rubric. Maybe not going into this policy, but I feel like now is a decent time to at least bring up the idea of having some sort of rubric to gauge whether or not that person is warranted this honor. Also, there's a part of me that thinks that the school itself should have some say. I mean, I don't know how we would quantify whether or not a school wants it or not, but I do think that the board probably shouldn't change the name of a school if that school itself doesn't want its name changed. I don't know how we would actually judge that, but I feel like that's something we should keep in mind.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of those comments. Christina, could you scroll down? There is a section that says the board has an obligation as well to investigate this request before we grant or deny such a request. Further, sorry, not so far down, that's the end. So essentially, I believe it's 6, under 6. So it used to be we had 6 months to investigate and so on, but here under 6, the board does have an obligation when we get an application for a school or part of a school to be renamed, for us to do our own investigative work to determine if that is something that is worthwhile. I think as part of that, we can consider certainly how the school feels about it. I would hope an applicant would also ask the school how the school feels about it, but of course that's not a given. There's an aspect we require district-wide communication. It used to be that it said in local papers, so we've sort of made that more modern to say district-wide communication via essentially any means, social media, electronic communication, and other forms of communication, as opposed to local papers that may or may not necessarily reach the desired audience. There is also, I should add, I believe Paul Foster and his team will be coming up with some administrative rules to further detail how we want to implement this policy, and also give more guidance to anyone who would be submitting an application for renaming a school. So this would be the policy, but there will be additional guidance in those administrative rules. And I intend to remain involved in that process and see what comes out of it. And I can certainly keep bringing that to this committee as well.
Well, that last bit about Deputy Foster having some more administrative tools behind that helps me feel better about this. So thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Board Member Walker?
Thank you, Chair. I was really going to ask for the document itself. I didn't see it before the meeting, and so I would just like to have access to it so we can see it when it's finally updated. And maybe Christine, just as a housekeeping, to link to where they all are, because occasionally I don't always find them when they're being worked on. Okay, I see it there now. I didn't see it on my board docs. So the one thing that I would also suggest, per the comments that Board Member Mills made, is to possibly have this as a future agenda item for board retreat, where we could flesh out a little bit more some of the detail criteria that we would like to see. And I do appreciate that Deputy Superintendent Foster will help implement it. But I know, like in this case, this current situation, Chair, that that I was approached by folks after the last meeting who were not aware, and it ended up with me contacting the school because they had also contacted the district because they found out at the board meeting. So it left me feeling like, yeah, there's definitely an opportunity to tighten the process part, not in the policy, but the kind of criteria. So I will leave it there. I'm just recommending that maybe at a future board retreat, we can have some time to flesh it out a tiny bit.
Thank you, Board Member Walker. Board Member Wilson?
Yeah, just to clarify, we are discussing the policy at large, not the specific request to have the request that's been made to the board to change the name of a particular school. I just wanted to kind of just make that clear. The request of the request that was made is made of what sparked us to see that a change needed to be made, but this change does not guarantee that the request that was made previously will be approved.
That's correct. If you recall, the prior policy, well, it's really technically the current policy, says that someone has to be deceased, which was the main obstacle for the current request at hand. So we're considering revising the policy, and this is the proposed revision. Probably the most significant change is that someone does not have to be deceased for a school or part of a school to be renamed after that individual. Once we do have a new policy, in light of that new policy, then we will reconsider the application that we have for renaming Classical Magnet. But, one did spark the change, but the two, in theory, should be separate and independent. But this policy will guide how we review the application that we do have. Did that adequately answer your question?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily.
Okay.
Yes, it was more of like let's just make that clear for the public to understand. Yep.
Got it. perfect. Thank you. We have 3 Wilsons on this meeting. So you guys are really, really taking over. All right. Any other questions or comments on this agenda item? Okay, perfect. Next item are about first readings. First is the bullying prevention and intervention policy, and I will again kick it over to Deputy Foster.
Yes, thank you. So really the next 2 are related. And so I'm going to speak to the bullying prevention and intervention first, but I'll give a little bit of background that really applies to both of these policies. And so there was a new state law passed, and that the state law requires that we adopt, we already had, I should qualify this and say, we have always had as a district a safe school climate plan, which is essentially a document that outlines what we do in terms of ensuring a safe climate in our schools. There was legislation passed last year that every district in Connecticut has to adopt a district safe school climate plan as board policy. And so that's something we're obligated to do, and that has to be done by July 1st of 25. And that safe school climate plan, and we're calling it a plan/policy, also has to include language relative to our bullying prevention policy. So we already had a board policy around bullying prevention and intervention. So that's what you see in front of you right now. And so the red line here is changes and additions to our student bullying prevention and intervention policy that are necessary to bring the bullying prevention and intervention policy in alignment with the new requirement for the Safe School Climate Plan. So some of that is definitional in terms of how we define some of our terms. So for example, if you look there in I think it's the 4th paragraph, we had a definition of bullying in our bullying prevention and intervention policy, but actually in the state legislation, it stipulates that districts adopt the Safe School Climate Plan model developed by CABE. And so that has a particular definition of bullying. And so we're changing so this first proposal is the necessary red lines to bring our current bullying prevention and intervention policy in alignment with the requirements of that legislation around the Safe School Climate Plan. And then just to speak to the second thing, the thing that will come after this, that is the Safe School Climate Plan that we're required to adopt per the legislation. And there are some additions to it that are reflective of our bullying policy as well. So the 2 are related. The first is a red line because we have an existing policy we're changing to be in compliance with the legislation. The second is a brand new policy for us, even though we already had a Safe School Climate Plan. Hopefully I didn't make that too confusing.
Thank you for those clarifications. Do we have any questions or comments on what Deputy Foster shared? All right, wonderful. That was crystal clear. So that really covered the next item of our agenda as well, which is the District Safe School Climate and Bullying Plan. Did you have any other additional comments you wanted to add, Deputy Foster? Or do you think that encompasses?
I can just say, I mean, one of the things you're going to notice, it's 14 pages long. That is not typically the length of our board policies, and we looked into that. And the legislation was pretty clear. We have to adopt the entire plan as policy. So typically we would have a shorter policy and then we would have administrative regulations or a plan that comes from the policy. But just in terms of explaining why it is so long, the legislation requires that the entire plan be adopted as policy.
Thank you. And lastly, the final item on our agenda is the homeless students policy, which is a new policy to us. We did not previously have such a policy. Please correct me if I am wrong, but that's what we discussed at the pre-committee meeting. It's a very, my reading of it, it seems to be a very thoughtful and considerate policy. I will open it up to see if, I guess first, Deputy Foster, if you have any comments you want to add, and then take questions and comments from the rest of the group.
I will just say 2 things. One is, again, this came from, as we had the audit of our policies through CABE, and CABE flagged that we did not have a policy specifically around homeless students. But the second thing I want to add is, for the purposes of the viewing public, we do follow, so there's particularly a federal statute called McKinney-Vento, which stipulates how districts interact with homeless students, and we certainly follow that and are in compliance with that. So much of what's in this policy is putting into policy things, practices that we are already doing.
Board Member Walker?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I apologize. I'm multitasking over the two issues. I've read through most of the policy. The only question I had was around immunizations. It seemed to indicate that there'd be some waivers, and then we comply with the Board of Education policy on immunization. I was thinking, where's the connection to public health? Is that within our Board of Ed policy, or why wouldn't we just say we'll comply with whatever the local public health requirements are on immunizations?
I mean, we do have a board policy on immunizations. I don't have it in front of me at this moment.
Yeah, I don't either. Mhm.
And the other thing I'd want to check on, and we can certainly do this and get back to you, but I want to make sure that we're in compliance. I don't know, I mentioned the federal McKinney-Vento statute, and that statute largely is around what are the steps that districts are obligated to take to ensure that homelessness is not a barrier to school attendance. And that's really where the immunization record piece comes in. And so I would want to do two things. I can certainly kind of crosswalk this with our current immunization policy, but also make sure that our current immunization policy and McKinney-Vento and our obligations under McKinney-Vento are aligned.
Thank you. That's the reason I was asking, because I figured usually there's some higher thing you got to comply with for immunization. So I didn't want our policy to be the final word. So thank you.
Have we given thoughts, instead of calling them homeless children, referring to as home, could it say unhoused children? I think that's kind of the term that is more commonly preferred and used these days.
Certainly can make that change, yes. I mean, I don't believe we're obligated to use the homeless student language in our own policy. So absolutely, we could make that change. Although, Aaron, I couldn't tell if you were nodding or shaking your head.
Not
I
to
was shaking my head that no, we're not this is the CABE, based on the CABE model policy, but it's not, there's no like law or anything that says that we have to use this exact language. So that is a change we could make.
Not to sound just contradictory. I know I routinely do that, but I struggle with topics like this because I think the average human being does not use terms like unhoused. While I can understand the desire to use terminology that is more inclusive, and just for lack of a better term, better, I don't necessarily think the average human being calls them unhoused versus homeless. So personally, I don't think we should change it. Like, I don't really necessarily think it's that big of a deal. I don't really want to argue about it, but I think that if nomenclature that is used by the general public is not quite the same as what I like as much as an aspirational term, I think until it becomes slightly more prevalent, we should keep it as what the average human being is probably going to call it, and I don't think it's unhoused.
Do we have any other comments or questions regarding this policy?
Has the term homeless become derogatory in some type of way? Does anybody have any insight to that?
I'm relaying from friends who work in that space and who do this as their life's work. They use the term unhoused, and I take my cues from people with more subject matter expertise than I have in any area. Therefore, I think unhoused is the more appropriate term to use. But it's not a hill that I will die on. Board Member Walker?
Um, yeah, I would say that I think homeless is probably the term that's better understood, and maybe we can speak of it in some ways. I agree with what you're saying, Chairperson Fortune, that and speaking to people, I would like to use terms that are less stigmatizing as we're talking about it. But yeah, I would agree with Boardman Mills that homeless is the term that most people know about, and if I just wrote the term homeless and unhoused, I kind of feel like they think I'm being smarty pants to use the word unhoused in writing about it. But that's my 2 cents there. I'll stop.
Board Chair Hucknall?
So I'm with you, Ruth. I've heard unhoused more than homeless these days, but there is also, another way to express it being individuals experiencing homelessness instead of saying a homeless person. Like that's, I think, kind of what folks are kind of getting away from, but still using the word homeless as a word that folks understand. That might be another option, but just for consideration.
Through the chair, I like the splitting the difference.
Thank you all for the comments. Any other thoughts, concerns, comments, additions?
I'm just checking right now to see what the city uses. Not that that's the be all end all, but like if the city also uses unhoused, then I'm just not going to complain. But unfortunately, I can't find anything really quickly. But I feel like if we do figure out like what the city uses, not that we need to, but like if it is unhoused, then I'm gonna withdraw my complaint, I guess. But I suppose do we have to make a decision on this now? This is just a first reading. Yeah.
This is the
Okay.
first reading. We can, in theory, make a change between now and the subsequent meeting and the second reading. I could, we
All right,
could
cool.
technically still make a
I
change.
will keep thinking on this then and try and figure out what other entities use just so we have it for comparison.
Okay, I think that probably concludes our comments. Thank you all for your time and for joining us during this meeting. I don't need to get a motion to adjourn, right? Christina, all of a sudden, I can't remember what the process.
No, you don't.
Okay, we are